Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings.
Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations, a weekly podcast focusing on e-commerce topics featuring interviews with prominent people in the e-commerce space.
Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations by Practical E-Commerce. My name is Kerry Murdock. Cloud computing is a term that's frequently discussed and also frequently misunderstood. Google Docs would be an example of cloud computing, whereas Microsoft Office, locally installed on a computer, is not. In the e-commerce industry, there are many hosted cloud platforms, and one of the leading ones is Shopify. Its chief platform officer is Harley Finkelstein, and he joins us to discuss cloud computing and hosted e-commerce platforms. Well, Harley, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank you for the opportunity.
Harley, our topic today is cloud computing. Your company, Shopify, of course, is a cloud computing platform, a leading e-commerce vendor. My first question for you today is, what is cloud computing?
Well, there's a lot of different definitions, but as far as we're concerned, and from my own experience, cloud computing is really just on-demand resources via a network. It's your ability to pull and update things in real time without having to access or re-access any type of hard software. Really just being able to access any applications you need in real time, have updates done in real time, and basically operate, this is going to be fairly circular, but operate from a cloud rather than actually a piece of hardware.
A cloud meaning a server sitting somewhere.
Correct, yeah. So any type of server, and most are obviously third-party servers like an Amazon server or a Google server. But generally, I mean, Shopify is a software as a service. We are still believe we're in cloud computing because our users access our software through our network rather than simply buying the software off the shelf at a Staples or at some sort of retailer.
The notion of third-party apps that sort of bolt into a cloud platform has grown in popularity, of course. There are some leading platforms. Most browsers have app stores. Obviously, iPhone has an app store. BlackBerry has an app store. And your company, Shopify, does as well. So how does the notion of third-party apps, third-party applications, fit into a cloud computing platform?
I think traditionally, companies like Microsoft and even some of the more traditional businesses like IBM, they've sort of tried to be everything to everyone. They tried to sort of load up their software with every possible feature imaginable. And the truth is, or the reality is, when you use, or I use Microsoft Word, for example, we're only using a very small fraction or a small portion of the full features. What's happened in the last couple of years is companies have sort of turned internally and figured out what exactly are their core competencies. For us, for example, it's obviously e-commerce software, and so we're sticking to our core competencies and our competitive advantage. The idea of having these third-party integrations through the cloud or through some sort of network is really interesting because the trend that we're seeing is, again, companies are sticking to their core competencies and then aligning with other companies that are that are sort of industry-leading companies in a particular area. So, for example, Salesforce has the App Exchange, and Apple has their App Store as well. Apple could have built every single feature into the iPhone, like radio and satellite radio and games and all those other things, and it could have been done in a very native type fashion. It could have been built in, so when you picked up a new iPhone, everything was included. Instead, what they did is they only put in the tools that most people required most of the time. Same thing with what we've done over here at Shopify. Our product natively does everything that most people need most of the time in the area of e-commerce. Everything else that some people need most of the time, or most people might need some of the time, we've aligned with partners that are thinking about those particular areas exclusively. So, again, Apple could have built some sort of satellite radio right into their, or some sort of radio right into their iPhone. Instead, they aligned with the likes of XM or Sirius Radio, and they built an app. Apple could have built games themselves. Instead, they partnered up with guys like Rovio to create Angry Birds. We've done the same thing. We could do email marketing, but MailChimp and Constant Contact does it better. We can do accounting, but FreshBooks and QuickBooks does it better.
We are recording this, of course, on Friday the 22nd of April. Yesterday, Thursday the 21st, Amazon Web Services, which is a big hosting provider, they host many cloud platforms. Amazon's data center, as you know, in Northern Virginia was down for the better part of a day. That even affected us. We happened to host at that data center, and we were down for about 16 hours yesterday. Does that outage, should that give users caution on relying on the cloud, any sort of remote server for any key service?
Yeah, I believe that's the case. I think there should be some caution, of course, but for a company like ours, which is a hosted e-commerce provider, we want our users and our customers to know and feel confident that we are looking into it, and we are very, very cautious of outages like what happened yesterday. So fortunately, in our case, we were able to mobilize in real time so that there was very minimal, if any, outage whatsoever on our platform. But obviously there is a caution because as we talk about the cloud and we talk about third-party apps and all of a sudden we're sort of moving away from, in your case, in Practical E-commerce's case, you guys are trusting and hoping to some extent that by hosting with Amazon, you'll never have to worry about going down because they're such a large entity. But obviously, the lessons from yesterday were that, even though you're putting your confidence in a bit of a hegemonic company that is really industry-leading, Amazon is fantastic business, there is still some caution and you still need to be careful and fairly observant of what's going on around you. There is a chance that Amazon could go down. There's a chance that Google could go down. But what our mentality here is we have contingency plans in place that allow us to fix things and mobilize very, very quickly to avoid any type of outage. And the reason it's so crucial for a company like ours in particular is because our 14,000 users heavily rely on our hosted solution. If we're down, that means that their stores are down, that means their customers are down, and something like that can be devastating. And so companies like ours and I assume companies like yours after yesterday's event will obviously, will have and should have contingency plans in place that allow you to mobilize and move things over as needed. And so we have a plan. We've had a plan for a long time on how to properly move things over in case of an outage, and that worked tremendously well yesterday.
Here's a question, Harley, that puts you on the spot for a minute, and that is to follow up on your explanation of the theory of third-party apps. The theory being, as you described it to us, is that there are many platforms and software packages that are laden with unnecessary features that merchants or business people pay for that aren't necessary. So my question to put you on the spot is, which e-commerce platforms are out there right now that you believe have those unnecessary expensive features?
Well, in fairness and in the interest of full disclosure, I'm obviously a little bit biased. I think if you look conventionally at the e-commerce spectrum, at the lower end, you had sort of eBay, or Etsy, let's say, and at the upper, at the sort of enterprise level, you kind of had GSI Commerce that would build you a custom solution. And for a long time, that spectrum spectrum in the middle was fairly quiet and dormant. And if you wanted to sell something quickly and effectively and not spend much time thinking about it, you threw it up on eBay. And if you want to build a real store like a Sears or a Walmart, you would go to GSI. And then sort of in the late 90s, I think you had some new market entrants, Yahoo stores being one of them, that sort of came into the market. And I think the mentality there was a very sort of big business enterprise mentality, which is throw everything as much as possible into the software. And Yahoo stores at the time, was one of the first players. I mean, they certainly had first mover advantage. They had a ton of features in there. Some of them were within their core competencies, but many of them were not. And I think that was problematic. I think sort of after the bubble burst in 2001, you saw new market entrants into the e-commerce space that were thinking a lot more critically, the likes of Shopify and the likes of even Magento, that created these sort of APIs whereby they integrated with people that were doing things better than they were in particular areas. So again, going back to the example of even accounting, Shopify or Magento can build accounting software. We're pretty good software developers, but we prefer to have someone like QuickBooks integrate with Shopify or whatever the other API would be, and work with those guys who all they're thinking about is accounting. And if you look at sort of the space or the ecosystem today, where you have Shopify and Magento and Magento Go, for example, what you're seeing a lot more of use of APIs and app stores to integrate. And what's happening is these sort of companies are creating less sort of more versatile products. It's less clunky, it's less weighed down, it does exactly what you need, and then you always have access to all those additional features through the API. And I think that trend you can see that trend with Google Docs, for example, rather than Microsoft Office. You can see that, for example, with the iPhone rather than something like, even the BlackBerry that has a ton of native apps on it.
The one argument against cloud computing goes something like this, as you know. It goes, cloud computing is all well and good. The use of third-party apps that bolt into a cloud platform, that's all well and good. But the simple fact is it's more expensive than licensed software. That is, if I'm a merchant, and I am paying Shopify, to pick a number, $50 a month, $100 a month, with a couple of apps, third-party apps, to run my online business, that's $600 to $1,200 a year. That buys a pretty serious licensed software package, and so that's the argument, is that it's simply more expensive. What's your response to that?
Well, I think in some cases, and if you look at sort of if you look at it as an investment, you might be paying $50 a month versus maybe going to, again, a Staples or a Best Buy and buying some sort of software off the shelf. The main difference to us, and this is why I think it actually is not as expensive, I think it's actually much more affordable to use a software as a service model where you pay a monthly subscription fee like we have at Shopify, is static versus dynamic. When you buy something off the shelf, it works exactly that way, and it will continue to work that way forever, for all of time. It's not going to change. You can download updates, perhaps through the web. Typically, you are charged for those updates, like you would be for Microsoft Office, for example, when you get the new updates. Whereas when you're talking about software as a service and you're paying a monthly subscription fee, first of all, in many cases, it updates automatically. You take advantage of the software's evolution just by virtue of continuing with the subscription. You don't necessarily have to download anything new or different. You don't have to update the software. For example, as we get better at providing merchants with amazing e-commerce software, any merchants that have previously signed up for our software will automatically be able to take advantage of that. That's a very, very powerful tool. The fact that our merchants that even started with us in 2006 or 2007 know that in 2011, as we get better at creating e-commerce software, we have better integrations, we have new partners, we have new initiatives. They can take advantage of that simply by continuing their relationship with us. Whereas if they were to buy something off the shelf, or even if they were to have a custom-made solution from a GSI or an enterprise company like that, iCongo or Cactus Commerce, they would have to go back to that particular enterprise developer and say, I need this updated, or I need you to provide me with new tools. And typically there will be, of course, a cost associated with that, and that might be very high or it might be very low depending on what that change is. But simply by virtue of being a Shopify customer, for example, anything that we do as we get better, your software automatically gets better as well. And that, I think, is a very, very powerful philosophy that wasn't around prior to the whole concept of software as a service.
Harley, let's step back just for a sec and
Sure.
ask you a question in your role. You're the chief platform officer of Shopify, of course, but in addition to that, I know you're an entrepreneur and a technology observer yourself.
Sure.
In that role, in the latter role of your entrepreneurship and your observer of the technology business, what's the natural evolution of cloud computing? And what I mean by that is Google, of course, has announced that Chrome, they're working on a Chrome operating system that would be a cloud operating system. With that example, what's the ultimate resolution for that?
So really interesting question. My own personal opinion on that is I think eventually we'll be at a point where the entire computing experience will be done through a dummy terminal. Effectively, the actual hardware will have very little software on it, and you'll access everything through your online connection. So it doesn't matter how fast your computer is. I mean, you have to obviously have the basic prerequisites of speed and agility and performance. But assuming that you don't have to have the fastest computer or the computer that's loaded up with the most amount of software, because you're going to be able to access everything from the cloud or from the web. Whether it's you're running your e-commerce store, whether it's using Google Docs, whether it's communication through some sort of web-based, voice over IP. My belief is that we're going to get to a point where we're simply going to log on through these dummy terminals, which are basically going to be pieces of hardware, laptops or desktops or iPads, and effectively you're going to start your entire computing experience not when you press the on button on the computer, but rather when you log on to the internet and you're able to access the web. And that's why I think Chrome's, as an operating system, is a very compelling philosophy and a very compelling application, because that is exactly what this whole concept of dummy terminals is. You don't necessarily need these bulky pieces of native software on your computer anymore. As long as you have a web browser, you can access anything you need. And in many cases, it updates in real time. It's a lot more advanced. It's a lot more fluid. The idea of pressing Control-Alt-Delete because a couple applications are crashing, I think, are long gone. I think cloud computing is going to help a great deal with that.
We have just another minute or two left here. Anything else on your mind for our listeners, who, of course, are e-commerce merchants?
Well, I'm a listener and an avid reader of Practical E-commerce, so I kind of know and am excited by what you guys talk about. One of the things that I think is really interesting and I think most of your readers and listeners already know about is from an e-commerce perspective, I think the barriers to entry have never been lower before. Prior to joining Shopify, I ran an online store called Smoofer.com, and I ran that actually while I was in law school. I needed to make some extra money to pay my law school tuition. And I set up a small little T-shirt company, actually using Shopify because it was the easiest for me at the time, and it worked fantastic. But at that point, I still had to run to the post office every single afternoon to deliver my packages. I had to answer emails for customer service. Returns were fairly difficult. Not to mention, I didn't have this amazing, I had to design the site myself. Today, whether you look at front-end design through a theme store, like Shopify's, or you look at third-party fulfillment companies like Amazon Fulfillment, Webgistics, Shipwire, who even do customer service at some point. E-commerce, the barrier to entry into the e-commerce space has never been lower. It's so easy and simple to run an online store, and you can scale it extremely well to make it a $1 million business selling worldwide. And even if you have another job or you're in school full-time, by integrating through APIs with really great partners like third-party fulfillment and customer service companies and coupon companies, you're able basically to run a really amazing business as you know, and you can be as hands-on or as hands-off as you would like. And that didn't exist even 3 or 4 years ago. And that's really exciting, I think, because what we're seeing is we're seeing the democratization of e-commerce. It's becoming easy and it's becoming accessible for everyone, regardless of technical understanding or capital.
Okay. Well, for purposes of our listeners, we've been visiting with Harley Finkelstein. Harley is the Chief Platform Officer for Shopify. That's Shopify.com, one of the leading cloud-hosted e-commerce platforms. That's Harley Finkelstein, Chief Platform Officer. The company, again, is Shopify.com. And Mr. Finkelstein, we want to thank you for your time today.
My pleasure, Kerry. Thanks again.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for this week's e-commerce conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Please tune in next week for another new episode.